So as we move into the last section of this year, our year of tangible thusness, we are also moving into the last area of focus for this theme, this practice theme. We spent the first 4 months considering nyoho clothing, which was robes, but also our everyday clothing. We spent the next 4 months on nyoho food, which is, food during sesshin, but just how do we eat, cook meals every day. Now we take up the third one, which is nyoho shelter. So since it's been several months since we've talked about nyoho, we should probably do a quick review. So clothing, food, and shelter are said to be the three faces of nyoho. Nyoho means something in accord with the dharma, or something which is the same as the dharma. It's important we carry both of those, right? Something which is made or used in accord with the dharma, also something which is not separate from, not different from dharma. So the central question of nyoho is, does this thing create attachment? Does this cup, does this meal, does this building, does this robe create attachment? Is it made or used in a way that encourages clinging, self-clinging, or clinging to that thing, either to this beautiful object or this valuable object or this precious object, or to who we are in relation to that thing? If I have this thing, what does that make me? Who does that make me? So because we know, of course, craving, attachment, clinging are the basis of suffering. So, of course, this is an important question for us. So, are we approaching things with that mind of clinging, or are we encountering things simply as they are, without adding our own stuff, our own story, greed, anger, and ignorance, right, to that encounter with that object? So we might think it's a strange idea applying this nyoho approach to something like shelter, which traditionally, of course, means a temple. Now, I hope by the end of the year we'll expand beyond temple, right? But let's start there. How can there be individual attachment to a temple, which we don't personally own, or we don't, personally use in the way that we use food or clothing, right? We don't consume quite in the same way. Well, this intersection was at the heart of our ancestor Kodo Sawaki's discernment about his approach to practice, interestingly enough. In the book, Zen Teachings of Homeless Kodo, there is an episode of his life as a novice where he heard of a lawsuit that was caused by conflicts between Dharma brothers over who gets to run a particular temple. So somebody's having a food fight over who gets to run some particular temple, who gets to be the abbot of this nearby temple. So Sawaki Roshi realizes, a temple can indeed be an object of greed. There can actually be clinging and craving and attachment to a temple. Over time, he saw this happen with other people. He saw it happen to other temples, even within his own Dharma family, and he says, I'm going to resolve never to have a temple myself. Well, we know the result of that. Homeless Kodo, right? So we understand practicing with the nyoho approach can mean both the way we make things, like food, clothing, and shelter, and also the way we understand that these things are themselves dharma. So nyoho practice goes beyond our own construction of things like robes and meals, which we've spent a lot of this year talking about, right? How do we gather the ingredients for a meal? How do we sew? What's our mind like when we're sewing a robe, right? It goes beyond our own construction of these things. How do we understand a temple that we didn't have any hand in actually building, right? Certainly in Japan, you go to a temple, it's 800 years old, you had no hand in actually constructing that temple. In North America, we have a different situation. Our temples are not 800 years old. Many of us actually did have a hand in maybe even felling the trees and making the boards to create our dharma spaces. So how do we understand the nature of clinging to things that we simply encounter and not things that we necessarily have physically constructed? That's what we get to do with nyoho shelter. Most of us. So this year we've seen that there are certain characteristics of nyoho things. We've talked about taishiki to nyo, right? We've talked about color or form or tone, and we've talked about materials, and we've talked about amount or size. So taishiki and ryo. So when we're looking at something with a mind of nyoho, we consider how appropriate are color and materials and size. So nyoho things are generally unassuming, unpretentious. They make use of what's here, or maybe what we already have, and they help us maintain some connection to the past, or some connection to a larger context, or a precedent. So there's lots we can dig into related to the intersection of these characteristics with shelter. and I'm sure we will. We can consider the colors that we see in a building. We can consider the atmosphere or the tone that those things set, the effect that that has on our life and practice. Early on, when we were first talking about technology, somebody had the bright idea to replace, in the interest of television, to replace all the lights in here with lights that give off a really blue color. And I said, wait a minute, this is a Zendo. What do they tell us? Don't take your screen to bed with you at night. It's the blue color that will keep you awake. What's that going to do to Zazen? Right? So there are considerations like that. What color are the walls? What color is the light? Those things can be important. We can think about materials, sort of like when we considered the ingredients in our discussion of food. Maybe we're interested in green building materials or green building processes, or simply being economical, being careful with our resources. Of course, stewardship is a big practice. We can consider size, the amount of space we really need to support whatever the functions are that we're going to carry out in that temple or in that practice space. If it's too big, we have a hard time taking care of it. It costs too much. It's too much. If it's too small, of course, we don't have enough storage. We can't accommodate all the people that we want to invite into the space to practice as part of the community, to share it with us. So Taishik and Ryo, definitely we can think about those things in a concrete way related to shelter. Shelter can be aesthetically appealing and still be unassuming and still be unpretentious, right? It can be functional without being Baroque and creating some kind of pride. I have the fanciest temple on the block. We have the most expensive building materials on the block. It's the most, has the most treasures. So something can be quite appealing and still be not fancy in a way that doesn't create clinging. Now, sometimes we have the idea that everything Zen has to be austere. And if you've ever seen a Hato in Japan, you know there's gold stuff hanging from the ceiling, there's brocade everywhere. Westerners see that and they're kind of surprised because we think nyoho shelter means nothing, right? So again, we can't have a fixed idea about that. So shelter, nyoho shelter can make use of what's already here. Maybe we incorporate some architectural salvage. Maybe we rebuild something that already exists. Maybe we reuse some existing furniture, right? There's lots of ways to do that. Or if we have skills and equipment, we can cut the trees on our own land, plant our own boards, and build with that. That's what happened at Hokioji down in southern Minnesota. There's still the remains of an old sawmill down there. They were actually cutting their own trees, making their own boards. So the last characteristics of nyoho things that we've considered previously is that there is only this one thing. Each thing is a complete expression of everything, right? So if there's a nyoho thing, there is only this one thing. It's a complete expression of everything. There is only this one robe. There is only this one bowl of soup. There is only this one temple. It's that point of view that I want to take today as we're taking up nyoho shelter. There is only one temple. So in the most traditional sense, when we're talking about nyoho shelter, again, we're talking about temples. At some point, we'll move beyond temples. But we can certainly apply nyoho teachings to other buildings, whether that's our houses or our offices or our dog houses or whatever we're calling shelter. Let's start with temples for today. So in Buddha's day, he and his Sangha were not living and practicing in temples. As we know, they were wandering around for most of the year, sharing the dharma. And then during the monsoon or the rainy season, when traveling around like that becomes inconvenient or unsafe or not possible, then everyone gets back together for 3 months or so, all in one place, right, to practice together, to share what they've learned, to reinforce practice. And they hold an ango, literally a peaceful dwelling, right, what we call a practice period sometimes here in North America. So every year they practiced in a different place, probably in a park or some piece of land which was donated by somebody who wanted to support the Sangha in that practice. Somebody made a patch of land available to this wandering group of practitioners. Wherever they found themselves, that was their temple, simply because they'd all gathered in one place to practice. That was their practice place. So at the moment of their coming together, there were the three treasures, even without the walls and the pillars and the doors and the ceilings and all that stuff, right? At the moment that this community comes together, three treasures are there. There's a practice place. There's a temple. So of course, this is really close to home for us because of Sawaki Roshi, also known as Yadonashi, or homeless Kodo, right? Although he was asked to settle down in various temples, he had multiple requests. People said, please come to this temple or that temple and settle down here and run this temple. He never agreed to do it. And instead, he, of course, spent his career traveling all over Japan, leading sesshin, teaching people to sit, talking about the dharma. He visited training temples, he visited local temples, he visited lay people's houses, and he calls his activity a moving monastery. So his temple is not fixed in one place. Wherever he gathered with people, that was his temple, even if that's somebody's living room or, talking about zazen over tea or something, right? Structure was not important. It was the nature of the place, and what held it together was that it was a place of practice, full of Buddhas, if you will, all sitting shikantaza, right? A place full of Buddhas is your temple. So in the early days of that Sangha, they gathered somewhere for an ango. Probably the shelters there were temporary. I think there were, historically, some small, simple shelters. Everybody had a little shelter, a little shack. Those things were temporary, like tents or huts or something. Those might come down at the end of the ango when the Sangha would disperse again to go back out into the world and teach the Dharma. So this is a very temporary situation. Over the course of time, some of those gathering places might become sort of regular venues. Maybe that donor makes that space available every year or every other year, or there's a rotation, right? Some of these become regular haunts for the Sangha. Maybe there are tents there one year, and the next year maybe there's some shacks, and maybe the next year there's something more solid, like a temple, right? Over time, things become more permanent, more concrete. So it seems like a logical sort of natural development, but I imagine that changed the quality of the practice. So up to this point, wherever the Sangha gathers is the practice place. It might be here this year, it might be over there next year, wherever they are is the practice place. That's the temple. It doesn't matter, because what's important is Shakyamuni and his followers are there doing the practice, and that's what defines the space. Now there are temple buildings, and people go to the temple. The temple doesn't end up wherever the people are. Now people are going to a temple. So it becomes an ongoing spiritual place, an ongoing practice place. People go there consistently. It takes on a certain purpose, takes on a certain function. This is where we go to practice together as a community. This is our temple. So over time, our understanding of that temple space develops. Probably it's been there for some time. It's become a place with a certain feeling or a certain atmosphere. Todo-san has told us more than once this place is now a Buddha field. We've been here 20-some years, right? This has taken on a certain atmosphere here. When we walk into a temple or we walk into a Dharma center or a Zendo, we understand why it's important. We understand that there have been many hours of practice in that space. Many practitioners, many people have gone through that space. Intentions have gone into creating that atmosphere, that space, whether it's a physical space or not, permanent physical space or not. Every temple, every Zendo is slightly different depending on where it is. Certainly in this country. Your Zendo could be someone's living room or someone's gazebo or a storefront or an old house, right? Or a yurt. Every one of them can look and feel a little bit different depending on how old it is, where it is, who practices there, what's the intention, what's the family style. The reality is that every place is subject to causes and conditions. So there's forms related to temples and practice spaces, right? There's causes and conditions, and things arise. So the land has a certain kind of topography. We need to know, how does the water flow? How does the light shine? What's the weather? What do we need to expect, right? If we're in northern Minnesota, we have a different kind of weather than if we're in Boca Raton, Florida, right? So it's all causes and conditions. It's maybe next to resources. Maybe it's next to resources. Maybe we have to bring in resources. Can we cut our own trees, or do we have to bring in boards, right? Where is our water coming from? How close to the nearest grocery store? When I was at Hokioji, the nearest grocery store of any appreciable size was 45 minutes away. Did that affect our practice? Sure. So, temple's made from what's around it, including the people who practice there, the people who spend time in it, the intentions and the practice of the people who spend time in it. So it changes as causes and conditions change, right? Temple is moving all the time, just as individual circumstances change, right? According to its individual circumstances. So we can't ignore that world of form. As fast as I'm telling you there's only one temple, I'm also saying, and we can't ignore the world of form. But there is a through line that connects all the temples everywhere throughout space and time. It's not magic. That sounds a bit magic world, but when we think about that, it makes a whole lot of sense, right? There's something that connects all these temples. And in that way, there is just one temple, that's it. The temple you're in, that's it. That's the only temple there is. This one temple is an expression of all the other temples. So we experience this not only in temples, right? We experience this in other kind of buildings as well. When we visit a hospital, in a way, there is just this hospital. We walk into a hospital, it exists. There is just one of them that exists across space and time if we consider we have a shared understanding of what we do in a hospital, right? How we behave there, what goes on there, how we act, what we do. Being in a hospital is like this, whatever this is, right? Being in a hospital is like this. We do this, we behave like this. So the same is true for a lot of other circumstances and buildings you could name. Airports, libraries, post office, right? Other places. Oh, this is an airport. I know what it's for. I know how to behave in this space. I know how to be here. It's the same for the airport I just left. It's the same for the airport I'm arriving in. I mean, I'm sure at some point everyone's done a long trip. You've had 2 or 3 legs and you've gone through multiple airports. And after a while, you don't know what the hell city you're in. It's just an airport. It's just a big airport, right? So this airport that I'm leaving, this airport I'm arriving in, it's the same as every airport I've ever been in, every hospital, every library, every post office. There is only this one. So we've all had that experience. It's not magic. So when we consider temples as nyoho shelter, part of that practice, of course, is to consider how they're built, what they're made of, how big they are, what they look and feel like, how well they function to support the practice. But the point is not to build a temple that gets compared with other temples. So yes, there's form, and yes, we need to take care of the form. And the point is not to say, I'm building a temple which is different or special or unique or better or something, right? Fill in the blank. Our temple is special because something, right? I'm pretty sure other zendos do not have an altar that swings out from the wall and conceals an escape hatch out into the moss garden. I'm pretty sure we're the only ones that have that, thanks to Hoshin, right? So we could look at that and go, oh, our temple is really special because we have that. That wasn't the intention. That wasn't the reason that Hoshin built it that way, right? There was a function he needed to take care of. So, aren't we a particularly impressive Sangha? Don't we have a particularly impressive temple because we built a temple that is uniquely like this? And oh, in America, we so want to have identity, right? We really want to stand out. We want to have our market niche, man, We want to look like a certain thing. So in temple is nyoho shelter. We may step inside for the first time and say to ourselves, yep, this is a temple. I know what this is. I've been in a temple before. I've been here before, even though I've never been in this particular temple. I know what this is. I know what we do here. I know how to act, how to behave. So this temple includes all other temples. There is just this one. So if you've ever been to another temple, you've probably had that experience. You know a certain amount when you step in the door. I know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a cushion. I know how to bow. There's certain shared forms. This is the same. There is only this one temple. The first time I ever went to Japan, I went as a layperson with a rakusu. I went to a service at a temple. Even though I didn't understand Japanese, I knew exactly what to do. My body knew when to bow, it knew when to get up, it knew how to sit down because the bells were exactly the same. Even though the language was different, I didn't understand then how to chant in Japanese. It's like, oh, this is exactly the same. So I had a very direct understanding, and I remember actually appreciating that understanding at the time. I had a very direct understanding that I was doing this practice in exactly the same way as everybody all over the world. So my friends in North America were doing the same practice. Yeah, they were doing it in English and probably in a different time zone, right? We were all doing the same practice. We were all in the same space. We were all in the same temple, even though I was halfway across the world. So I think Rohatsu Sesshin is like that, of all the things in our calendar, right? Because we all do Sesshin at the same time, over the same days, or at least 1 or 2 of the same days, all over the world. So in that way, we are all in the same zendo, sitting in honor of Buddha's awakening, right? Everyone all over the world, yeah, we're traveling across the world by time zone. Everyone's in the same zendo. We're all doing the same thing. Man, don't try to get any business done in the world of North American Zen during Rahatsu Sesshin, because everyone's in Sesshin. You won't raise anybody. Everything stops. So last Saturday, Hoshin did a workshop in which he helped 5 people to build altars for their homes. Small altars for their homes. Same one as up in the common room, right? So, although Hoshin provided all the pieces, he'd pre-made all the pieces, and he told them how to build it, and I'm sure there was a pattern or some general instructions. Probably, by the end of the day, each one of those altars was just a little bit different, right? Because each one was made by different people, different skills, different aesthetics, different whatever, right? Probably just a little bit different. When they got home and they put their altar either on the wall or on a table, I'm sure everyone put their own things on the altar. So probably everyone has a different Buddha figure or some kind of figure to put on the altar. Everyone's got a different candle. Everyone has a different incense burner, a different flower, a different altar cloth, different items, right, to go on the altar. So if we went to each of their houses and we looked at those altars, they would all be slightly different. And yet we would say, yep, that's an altar and I know what that's for. I know what that's about. I know what we do with that. I know how to behave in front of it, right? When these folks are practicing with their altars, and I'm practicing at home with my altar, we are all in the same space, interestingly. So even though with nyoho practice, we're concerned with physical characteristics like shape and size and color and all that stuff, amount, a nyoho temple doesn't have one fixed size, color, shape, location. It's the only temple wherever we are, and it's not disconnected from all the other ones. So in the last 5 years, I think virtual practice, of course, has given us a whole new way to think about ryo, right? To think about amount, and to consider the temple as nyoho shelter. It's a very direct way to understand that the temple has no fixed size, no fixed location. Folks at home have created their own practice spaces, some of which we see sometimes on the screen. I hope with some consideration for Taishiki Ryo, but maybe. If your walls are fuchsia, okay, you know, we've created your own space, and that's fine. They're not physically here, and yet when the computer's on, we all feel like we're practicing in the same space, right? In the morning, so 6 days a week, we've got people practicing all in this sort of non-fixed zendo. And since folks are coming in from all over the world, the temple doesn't even have a fixed time, right? Virtual practice isn't the only thing about time. We've got folks in different time zones coming in from all over the place, right? In the morning, we have people coming in from Europe. Well, it's not morning for them, right? So there isn't even a fixed time. So as we've seen, one of the elements of nyoho is connection with the past. And here I think we can also consider connection with the future. So time is not fixed. The temple is 100% real and complete right now, just as it is in front of us, no matter what. It's also constantly changing toward what it's going to be in the next moment, right? Because all conditioned things are impermanent. So there's, again, what do we hang on to? What is there about this that's fixed? The temple is made up of all the people who've ever practiced here. Everyone who ever came through the door is still here. Whether or not they ever came back, maybe we had a one-time visitor. Doesn't matter. Somehow that person, right, still part of this temple. Everyone who contributed to the unfolding of the life and the karma of the temple and the community had some hand in how it was shaped, even if all they did was come in and sit down for 50 minutes and breathe in and out and never came back. Something about that is still here. So Minnesota Zen Center, where I started my practice many, many years ago, it's about twice as old as Sanshin. It started in something like 1973, so more than 50 years ago. I started practicing there in 94. I remember being in the Zendo one day, fairly early on in my practice. I don't know if I had a Raksu yet. I had a place I always like to sit, which is it's the wall right next to the door. Maybe I was a Doan, I don't remember. Anyway, I remember sitting in the Zendo one day and putting my hand on the wall and having a sense of all the people who had been sitting there in that room over what was then a couple of decades, because this was 30 years ago, right? I could sort of see them all in my mind's eye, and I thought, dang, this building has seen a lot of stuff. Zendo has seen a lot of stuff. I imagined all the people, because imagine in 73, those were formative years for Zen in North America, right? I mean, those were the early days. There was some foundational stuff going on. People that are still around today that you like still know their names, right? And I imagined them all parading through the Zendo. So various people have sat in this zendo too, of course, over our couple of decades. They're not the only ones who were here. So the people who haven't arrived yet are also here, because there's nothing outside of this moment, right? There's nothing outside of this one unified reality. So all the people we have yet to welcome in here are here. And all the people that have been here are here. And they're all building this temple. This is what this temple is made out of. So what happens here today sets up the causes and conditions for the practice of the people who come later. So if you think you're not supporting practice, if you think you're just coming to sit, your being here enables the next person to be here, right? We're all connected in that way. So the Sangha in this space, in this moment, is the only Sangha, right? This is the complete expression of awakening. We know that because we understand our Zazen, right? We understand that our Zazen is a complete expression of awakening. So this Sangha is the only Sangha, because where's the edge in space and time, right? Where's the edge of this group? It has no edge. So this is the only Sangha. So I think this is what Uchiyama Roshi means when he says, everything I encounter is my life. This temple isn't just one temple on a list of Soto Shu North American temples. And I'm concerned about lists because I'm the president now of Sotos in North America, so I know who our members are, right? It's like, this is not just one temple on a list of temples, right? It's the only temple. It's the only Sangha. It's the only Dharma body. This is all there is. So it's a whole new way to think about ryo, or amount, or size, right? Ryo is infinite. And also, if you open the cupboard in the Zendo kitchen, there will be a concrete set of mismatched cups. They are very concrete, right? When new folks come to Sanshin and they say, where's the bathroom? We can tell them. And there's more than one room in this place. So there's a Zendo, and there's a bathroom, and there's a kitchen, and there's finite spaces. So the Zendo isn't the only room in the building, and yet the Zendo is the whole universe. And the kitchen is the whole universe, and the bathroom is the whole universe, right? Where's the edge? So although we're going to spend our nyoho time for the rest of this year considering shelter in terms of color, size, materials, all that stuff, I'm starting here with the most abstract view. I'm starting with the largest possible view of what a temple or a practice space is, right? There is only one temple. This is it. When we go to visit another temple, that's the only temple. Whatever temple we're in is the only one, which is a really interesting way to think about our practice. Why? Because that's where we're practicing with the community. So practice and awakening are not two. We know that from Dogen. Awakening has no boundary, so there is no way for places of practice to be separate across space and time. Where is the division, right? Where is the boundary? So Sawyer used an interesting phrase the other day. I'm sorry he's not here to take credit for it. He described our practice as being scaffolded by our liturgy. And I thought, well, that's really interesting, because we were heading into Nyoho shelter, and he wasn't sort of talking about that, but he described our practice as being scaffolded by liturgy, held up, right? So there was some structure around it that had to do with our liturgy. And we could say that this only one temple is scaffolded by things like Zazen, work study, and liturgy, right? That's what makes our temple. So it's what provides the structure. It's what makes the container. Those things don't have physical dimensions, and in that way, neither does this temple. Wherever we're doing Zazen, work study, and liturgy, there's our temple. So when we think about Nyoho temples as not encouraging clinging, not encouraging attachment, maybe the first conclusion we draw is that the buildings themselves don't need to be fancy and elaborate and coated with jewels and vermilion and lots of things, right? That's the first place our mind goes. Oh, attachment means it shouldn't have exotic materials or expensive stuff, right? So if our scaffolding is practice, then it doesn't matter. Are we practicing in a shack, in a field, in a palace, in the Metrodome? It doesn't matter, because the scaffolding, the structure, is the activity of our practice. There are ways in which a thoughtful, intentional practice space really supports the Sangha. There are ways in which we're pretty intentional about what this room is like. And I would say most Dharma centers are that way, right? They're going to think carefully about distraction, noise, temperature, all those things to make it possible to actually practice. We want to remove hindrances, obstacles to our practice. And so we have some intention. And the same at home, right? When you set up your space at home, you're very intentional about what's in that space. How do I support practice? But, as I mentioned earlier, the point is not to build the most uniquely amazing temple and that somehow that will make our practice better. So in Shobogenzo Zuimonki, Dogen Zenji says, even though the building is broken down, it is certainly a better place for practicing zazen than on the ground or under a tree. If one section is broken and leaks, we should move where there are no leaks to practice zazen. If monks could attain enlightenment by building a hall, we should construct one of gold and jewels. Enlightenment does not depend on whether the building is good or bad. It depends only upon our diligence in zazen. Now, we may hear teachings like that and decide, well, thinking about the nature of the practice space isn't necessary, right? That's a waste of time. That's an attachment. Any old space will do because it's just about the zazen, right? Maybe that's sort of consideration about what is the space like is a distraction from real practice, right? We shouldn't be worried about the nature of our practice space because that's a distraction. I think that's a mistake. Considering the nyoho approach to shelter is a real dharma gate. If we actually take considering our temple, considering the practice space from a nyoho perspective as a dharma gate, there's some interesting stuff in there, right? It's not just a matter of maintenance or of aesthetics or construction, right? There's something interesting happening there. This is the house of Buddha, right? After all, this is the house of Buddha. We treat the three treasures, we treat the relics of Buddha in a certain kind of way in this tradition. And that can help us think about this practice space. If this is the house of Buddha, what does that mean? If these are the relics of Buddha, what are we doing, right? Not so we can get precious about it, because it's really easy to get precious about, oh, this is my exotic practice space and it needs to be a certain way and I have to do a certain thing, right? No, that's about ego. That's not what this is about. Let's not get precious about it. But because taking care of the practice and the temple for everyone means that we break out of this kind of self-centeredness. So I think folks at home, you've got a real challenge because you've got your practice space and it's yours and you're the only one in it, probably. It can be really easy to get precious about that. Whereas we here, because there's a bunch of us, right, have the opportunity to think more broadly. There's other people in this space. Now, virtually, we're all in the same space, and I hope you take it that way, right? But, you know, we sort of have to break out of our self-centeredness in this room, because if I'm making a disturbance, I'm disturbing all of you. I have to think carefully about, you know, when I'm the Jikido in the morning, I pay attention to the light level. That's my job as a Jikido, right? Because really what that helps us to remember, if the lights are low in the morning, it's dark outside. It should be dark inside because there's no separation. If I have the work lights all the way up and you walk in here and it's 6 a.m., oh my goodness, that's painful, right? Keep the light level down, right? We can think about how do we take care of the Sangha when it's our job to do that. How do we take care of the Sangha in this practice space? So we don't, we can break out of this, well, the space needs to be pretty or comfortable or interesting for me. If this is the house of Buddha, if this is the Sangha's practice place, I can break out of that sort of clinging. And again, we have a chance, nyoho shelter, we have a chance to say, does this thing create clinging, attachment, craving, right? And how am I practicing with that? So we can fall down on one side of, well, the temple doesn't matter, it's all about the practice, as long as we're doing zazen, who cares? Or we can fall down on the side of, well, the temple matters a lot because I have certain preferences and expectations and I need to have this perfect exotic place. And we all know if we're waiting for the perfect space and time to practice, we're never going to practice. So what's the point of that? We just have to sit down. So somewhere in the middle, there's the house of Buddha as nyoho shelter. And the next time I'm in this chair, we're going to talk about the house of Buddha. What does that mean traditionally, right? In historical context. And that's really interesting because then we get to look at the idea of Buddha fields. What's a Buddha field? Where is the Buddha, right? What does it mean to make offerings? So that's a whole, stay tuned. That's a whole other interesting next chapter. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up here with a couple things from Dogen Zenji that seem to summarize all of these teachings about our understanding about the nature of temples and our sort of nyoho approach to that. So from Shobogenzo Gyoji, even if we don't have lofty temple buildings, if we practice, this place can be called a dojo of ancient Buddhas. Foolish people in this degenerate age should not be vainly engaged in construction of temple buildings. The Buddhas and ancestors never had desires for buildings. Many people today meaninglessly construct a Buddha hall or other temple buildings, although they haven't yet clarified the I of their own self. Such people build temples not in order to offer the buildings to Buddhas, but to make their own houses of fame and profit. So if we see the temple simply as a means of getting more people through the door, or housing our treasures, or our artworks, because traditionally temples had a storehouse of all their treasures, then our activity becomes all about managing the temple as a museum, or the temple as a hotel, or the temple as something else, right? Making sure that it functions in that way. Who cares about the practice? Let's make sure we get people through the door, or whatever our extra function is. So Sawaki Roshi had no time for that stuff. So to him, if the temple wasn't about practicing the Dharma, it was useless. Just a way for the monks to get rich, right? So that's not where we're headed with nyoho shelter. It's the activity that makes the temple, not the buildings. So one more from Dogen Zenji. When we make a vow to found a temple, we should not be motivated by human sentiment, but we should strengthen our aspiration for the continuous practice of Buddha Dharma. Even if we don't have lofty temple buildings, if we practice, the place can be called a dojo of ancient Buddhas. We hear that ancient people practiced on the ground or under a tree. Such places are sacred forever. A single person's continuous practice creates a dojo for many Buddhas. So he keeps saying the practice makes a place of dojo, makes the place a dojo for ancient Buddhas, right? A dojo, a practice hall, practice place. Why? Because they're all right here as soon as we practice. All those ancient Buddhas are here as soon as we practice, right? As long as practice is happening, Buddha's alive. We're all in the same space of zazen as soon as we sit down, as soon as we open the hand of thought. This is why we don't get better at zazen, right? There's just zazen, right? We enter into that space, there's nowhere to go. We've already arrived. As soon as we sit down, we're also in the one and only temple. There's nowhere else to go. We've already arrived. So all the other beings who've ever practiced are in that space with us, because they can't not be. So last one from the Zuimonki. Most people today mistakenly think that constructing Buddha images and building stupas helps the Buddha Dharma flourish. Even though we might erect huge temples adorned with polished jewels and gold, we cannot attain the way by these works. This is nothing more than merit for people enabling their wealth to enter into the world of the Buddhas and allowing people to do good. Although they might receive a great result from a small cause, for monks to be involved in such things has nothing to do with the flourishing of the Buddha Dharma. To learn even a single phrase of the Dharma gate, or to practice zazen even for a single period while living in a thatched hut or under a tree, shows the true flourishing of the Buddha Dharma. So Uchiyama Roshi also said, we can practice zazen with only 3 square feet per person and a zafu and a zabuton, and that's all we need, right? So the nyoho temple is itself Dharma, just like all nyoho things. Nyoho temple is itself Dharma, not separate from or other than Dharma itself. So it's unpretentious, it's unassuming, it's not trying to be something other than it is. On that basis, we recognize it, right? Wherever it is, this is a temple, and we recognize what it is and what it's for, and we're in that space. So this is a place of practice. This is the temple, the only one, the house of Buddha. So what would you all like to say this morning about nyoho shelter as we think about it sort of through the lens of temple, Dharma Center, practice space? Questions, reflections, comments? Let me start with folks in the room, and then we'll go to the folks at home. Anybody here? I got to think Hoshin's got something to say, but I'm not going to start with him. We'll see if somebody else wants to jump in first. Other things in this room? Owen.
So I'm thinking about what you say about you enter a certain type of space and you have like kind of a certain clarity about how you're supposed to comport yourself there. I'm thinking of kind of two contrasting situations I think might highlight something kind of interesting. I wonder what you think. So a week and a half ago, my partner's here, and in my home, it's like living room kind of foyer by the entryway, and then there's like 2 little half walls kind of separate, dining room, the rest of the house from everything, right? And on one of those half walls, I had set up like kind of a little mini altar situation. Really, really nice, kind of sanctifies the space a little bit, very cute. But it's also a very convenient surface, right? So my partner's coming in, bringing all this stuff from the airport, whatever, just like, throw something in front of the altar, right? And of course, I'm like just a little bit miffed, a little bit annoyed. But even as that's happening, I can like just see it. It's, she has no clue, and it's maybe a little bit like inconspicuous, so whatever. And I'll just, after doing everything, just forget her, please don't leave things there, right? Totally fine. And I think what's interesting is I can totally see it as what you're saying, just my own preciousness, my own like kind of attachment to this is a certain way, right? So the contrasting situation is when I had taken Jukai last year, I had invited both my parents to come, and they had not, I don't think, in like 15 years been in the same room together. And the last time they had been in the same room together, there was a big, explosion, right? And I was pretty confident, you walk into this room, you just kind of know how to comport yourself, right? Like this is, you don't cause a fight, right? And fortunately, it did work out that way. That everything's peaceful enough. But I think if that it hadn't gone that way, I would have felt very particularly like betrayed, very particularly, harmed, right? That to me feels more reasonable, as a way to feel compared to my altar at home, right? Like that to me feels not just about my own attachment to what the space is for, right? That to me feels kind of legitimate. I wonder what you think, when it's kind of a reasonable, justified expectation, and then when it's just this is me and my little idea.
Yeah, well, I mean, so, our response is fine. I think it's interesting for all of us who've been around in temples for a while to watch our responses to new people who come into the space and maybe don't know all the forms and walk through here and don't know, and they're walking around with their hands dangling, their hands in their pockets, and going, ah! And that's such an interesting thing because, of course, these people mean no harm. They don't know. Why would they? They're not there to thumb their nose at me in my practice, right? So you have to go, leave it alone. But it's really interesting, isn't it, how we become attached to, I know what to do in this space. Not everybody knows what to do in this space in the way that I expect, right? So like, we can feel like that's an affront, and so we really have to be careful about that. In this country, there are many styles of practice. And of course, there are practice places where they use no forms at all and don't wear robes. And that's their very particular intentional style, right? And then we get to wrestle with how we feel about that. So if you go into a place like that and you're used to a lot of form, what they will tell you is, well, this is your opportunity to let go of your attachment to all that form. And yeah, this is your opportunity to understand the tradition, You can really have a food fight over that, right? So we do get to watch our own responses to that, right? We can't hold a yardstick up to people. So I'm glad, in your case, your family got along and respected the space. And I'm, having met at least your mom, I'm not surprised, that she would know what to do. The altar at home is interesting, right? Because we've carved out a space and said this is special, and this is a sacred space, and nobody should violate the sacred space. And yet, your partner didn't mean anything by that. If you put an altar in a place that's normally a drop zone, people are going to drop stuff, right? And again, that can feel like an affront. But I think in some ways it's not different than someone walks into a zendo or into a temple for the first time and doesn't have the context. And then we get to say, okay, there's clinging, there's attachment, right? So when we think about, does this thing create attachment? And we say, well, temple, I'm not going to be attached to a temple. I didn't build it. I don't own it. I don't eat it for dinner. And yet, what we think about in this space is, what does this space make me? Right? And especially if we're experienced in this space and we see beginners, oh, can we feel righteous? And man, well, I know what to do. And here's someone who doesn't know what to do. And it's, I know how to behave in the space, right? There's all these stories coming up. So I hope for the last part of this year, we really get to consider some of those questions because they're really interesting. And I think the kind of thing you're raising is going to come up, right, more than once. Attachment can look like a lot of things. Attachment can look like a lot of things. We're attached to our practice in a certain way, right? Who does that make me? And if I'm not practicing in a certain kind of space, then who does that make me? It's all about the me. Other things in this room? Comments, questions? Jeff?
When Sanshin was shut down physically during COVID, I think that was within my first year, maybe the first 2 years of being involved. And I mentioned, sort of confessed to you one day that I would occasionally drive by. And it was I've been trying to define it, like that experience. I guess it was a kind of attachment, but it really was for comfort.
Yeah.
And I found it very comforting at that time.
Yeah.
Just
Building's still here. And to a certain degree, we tried to keep at least a minimum amount of activity going on. Hoshin and I were holding the space. We weren't, inviting the rest of the Sangha in, but he and I were still doing sesshin, and on some days we're still doing morning practice and putting that out by Zoom just so that people would know the lights are on, somebody's holding the space, Buddha's still alive, So yeah, now that you say that, I remember you saying I just drive past it once in a while to make sure it's still there. To get the vibes, Well, it's a Buddha field, all right? Todo-san says it's a Buddha field, so yes, we can appreciate it in that way. Other things in this room? Please, Hoshin, yeah, let's hear from our.
I'm attached to this place.
I'm sure you are. Well, talk about it. So you are not one of the people we can say has not had a hand in constructing it. Most of what we see has been constructed by you.
And I even remember the field before this place even existed. I remember what it was about, why we were attracted to this place to begin with. I forget, Bob Meadows found it, and it had this wonderful patch of bamboo. That we used.
Little did we know.
Of course, it's gone now, mostly gone. But I've had some interesting thoughts while we were going at this, thinking about how I'm attached to it, but on the second or third day of sesshin, I'm not so attached to it.
I want to go home!
So it's that impermanence moving through me. The other thing I was thinking about, and this is really kind of hard to express, is it that the real possible detachment or recognizing of one's affinities act the same as a dharma gate? I mean, I'm looking at it like thinking that in the same way that the third day of sesshin, you have a whole different thing going on here. I also recognize that every space I'm in, I'm, like my little house, I love it, and I love what it does. I'm attached to the way that light moves through it, that everything happens in it. But I also am aware of that possibility that I can observe how I'm changing within that space. Mm-hmm. So that to me feels more like the description of nyoho jiki.
So I wonder about because you've been practicing a long time. I wonder if what you're experiencing is attachment or simply appreciation, because I don't think that's the same thing. I think you can appreciate light the way the light moves without being attached to it, right? I think if it wasn't possible to make that distinction, we couldn't do like art from a Zen perspective. Right? I mean, so I think you can appreciate things without saying, I'm clinging to this in order to create a sense of self.
That's really helpful.
Because I don't think that's what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, I hadn't attached the term appreciation to all of this.
Yeah.
So
I think we can appreciate things without grabbing them and clinging to them and saying, you'll get this out of my cold dead hand.
Right.
Because I think if we couldn't appreciate things, we'd have a hard time being a community, for instance. Yeah. We couldn't appreciate things about each other because it would be all about this, So I think there's a way to enjoy beauty in the world and friends and family and nice meals and all those things without it becoming greed, anger, and ignorance. Right? Can we appreciate things without raising the three poisons? I think yes. And my guess is, because you're an artist too, that's what's happening for you. I mean, I'm not your head. Right.
Yeah, you are, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, that helps. That helps me think about it in a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think I don't think we need to stop appreciating things. And sometimes when we come to this practice and we hear about non-attachment and not clinging and unassuming and things that are humble and not grasping and elaborate, and all, we think, well, that means we can't appreciate beauty. I don't think that's what our ancestors are saying at all. I think we can absolutely appreciate beauty. And that might be the beauty of something you've painted, and it might be the beauty of a flower, and it might be a child, and it might be who knows, whatever you find beautiful and appealing and comforting. Right? I don't think we stop having positive responses to things. Can we do that without using it to create ego? I think that's the difference. Yeah. Otherwise, our lives would be really dry.
Yeah, what you were saying about your house, interrupted me, and my experience, that's where I am, was my understanding of the place has changed and deepened with every season. Sometimes the light changes a lot, and the way the leaves will stick to the windows, and it's seasonal, and I'm sure you know all of these things with your place. So it's not an attachment, I don't think, entirely, and I think it is appreciation and understanding by being through cycles, many cycles with it. And here too, I have really vivid memories of times of sitting when the light would hit the bamboo walls, or before there were bamboo walls, the yellow walls, and the texture would change, and it would go away and come back, and it was fantastic.
Well, it's something you really notice during sesshin. If you're used to only coming and sitting an hour on Sunday morning, you always see the place looking the same. My earliest responses or something to doing sesshin, like 30 years ago, was I noticed sitting in the zendo in the afternoon. I never sat in the zendo in the afternoon. I was only there on what was then Saturday mornings. The light's completely different. Oh, this is really interesting. This doesn't feel like the same place, right? So it's interesting that you bring up impermanence, because impermanence and attachment would seem to be on two opposite ends, right? They seem to be contradictory. We can appreciate impermanence without being attached to impermanence, right? I mean, it's really, to unpack that is kind of interesting. Yeah. I'm glad you brought it up. Genesis, please.
So my thoughts are a bit malformed, but so before I went to study abroad in Japan, I had this idea of the ideal temple is very Asian, and I remember when I went to this tourist trap temple called Sensoji, I cried because I felt like I saw a genuine Buddhist temple for the first time. It was technically the second one, but the first one it didn't really count in my mind. But anyway. And after a while, I started feeling the opposite. None of the temples in Japan felt like practice containers. Unless I was a monk or trained to be one, it was there was nothing.
Well, you won't see it going on.
And so then I started having this frustration over I really miss these temples that are built out of houses, and it feels there's a space for me and stuff. And the idea of there being one temple is something that I'm kind of wrestling with in sort of this dichotomy where I was I'm comparing between this constantly, because I don't know how to make sense of this.
Well, we can consider that different temples have different functions. So, of course, Japan has a different situation than North America, right? So in Japan, there's more than one kind of temple. There's the temple that serves the local community, and there's the temple that trains clergy, and those are not the same thing, right? And if you're there as a visitor, even if there is zazen going on somewhere, unless you're there for that, you won't see it. What you'll see is the things that are accommodating to visitors. So at Sensoji, we're probably doing calligraphy. Were you tracing the Heart Sutra or something like that? Sometimes places will offer things like that, right? So, it is, so in its way, it's all one temple because it's all one practice. But there's more than one manifestation of that, right? So North Americans are not always aware there's more than one kind of temple in Japan. And they go expecting all temples to look like a North American Dharma center. And they so don't. For so many reasons, they really, really don't, right? And then Westerners become, North Americans, I can't speak about anybody else, North Americans become discouraged. Oh, the practice is dead over here. And it's just that we're not seeing what we expect to see, right? So it's a very interesting experience to go looking for the ideal temple. I think we all do it, right? I mean, I did. And then, interestingly, I was much more rigid before the first time I ever went to Japan about what practice was supposed to be, right? What did I know? People were surprised that, oh my God, she's going to go over there and come back even worse. And actually, I came back and I had completely broken out of that because I could see there was no one true way. And I was really disappointed and discouraged by that because I thought, what does that make me? How do I understand my practice if there isn't one true way? If there isn't one thing I can say, this is the right way, this is the best way, how am I going to practice? How do I make sense of all these permutations of practice, right? 30 years later, I'm in some way still asking that question. So that's an interesting experience to have, and I hope you continue to do discernment about that. Every temple you go into is the same temple. It just doesn't look the same. Did you also want to jump in?
Yes. I find it really interesting you pointing out the singular is the totality, essentially. Because I've come to that same conclusion, not just the temples, but with literally everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why, see, that's one of the reasons the nyoho approach is really helpful, because we can say the same thing about everything. This is a complete manifestation of everything. This is every cup. This is every book. This is every cushion. So if we look at food, clothing, and shelter as gateways to understand that, we can apply it to everything. You're absolutely right. Folks at home, I don't want to ignore you. Are there things you'd like to say? Comments, questions, reflections, things to share with everybody related to nyoho, shelter? Doju's going to help me see if people have hands up and whatnot.
Yeah.
Neil? Oh, okay.
Hello. Yeah, no, I was also interested in this idea that there's only one temple, but also in one of your other responses, you mentioned, going to a practice center where maybe there are no forms and like feeling that reaction. And I think for myself, kind of growing up in the Midwest, especially if you're in a rural part of the countryside, there really aren't that many practice centers around. And so, you might be lucky to attend just one. And so I think that, in trying to recognize there's no one true practice, I think there's also some benefit in, learning about other ways people practice to really reflect on, what is kind of important or essential, and then what's maybe just idiosyncratic quirks of, one's own context.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I appreciate that.
So I think you're absolutely right. And as I say, 30 years later, I'm still asking some of those questions, because when I was beginning in this world of, today, books and internet and videos and talks and multiple styles and Dharma centers and whatnot, how do you wade through that and decide what the through line is? And do you start with Buddha and work forward, or do you start with your own ancestors and your immediate ancestors and work backward? And do they meet in the middle, right? I mean, it's hard to know, because you can't practice all of it. So how do you make sense of it, right? So I think that's why it feels important to me, for instance, to put things like the Buddhist Essentials page up on Sanshin Source, right? There's 19 key things there. It's like, okay, there's a backbone, there's a place to begin. Soshi's identified 24 key terms that thinks are really important for us all to understand about Soto Zen. Okay, that's a place to start, right? How those manifest might look very, very different from place to place, and it can be really helpful, as you say, to see how one group practices and another group practices. There are variations. Certainly in this Dharma family, we know we don't look like most other Dharma centers in North America. We don't even look like most training places in Japan. We have a very particular flavor. It's not better or worse than others, but it can be useful to say, okay, there's this, and then how does somebody else practice? And it can indeed be very helpful. In this day, when I was starting out, we didn't have virtual practice. You had to physically go somewhere to look at what somebody else was doing. And in these days, of course, we have many, many opportunities to check out how other people are practicing. So yeah, that can be very helpful.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, can I say something?
Yes.
Yeah. So
But you're going to
my
need to mute yourself because we're getting an echo. getting an echo.
Oh, mute?
Or somehow turn off speaker.
My speaker? Oh, my speaker. Okay. How about now?
Yes, thank you, better.
Better?
Yeah.
Hello? Oh, maybe. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So can any house be your temple? I mean, I think I do feel like that it can be any house be my temple, a temple. I live with like 12 people, 13 people, a lot of people doing drugs. But I'm still practicing there, so I think that's my temple. So,
Of
but
course. Yeah, and that's your sangha too, right? Those are all Buddhas in your house.
yes, I agree.
That's a big dharma gate. If you have a dozen drug-taking Buddhas in your house, that's a big dharma gate. But you're not wrong when you say wherever we are and wherever we're practicing, whether that's a half wall in your house or wherever you are, right? That's your temple, and in that way, it's not separate from every other temple. So, if indeed we're scaffolded by Zazen work, study, and ritual, then wherever we are is the one temple. So, yeah, we don't have any excuse not to practice. Other things from folks at home? Or anything else from folks here? Corey, please.
A question arose while you were talking. You were saying that we know how to act here, but the question is, do we know how to act here? Because, and where I'm going with this is, every new person, or like every old person who comes into this place, like changes this place imperceptibly, usually. Though sometimes it can happen all at once. Like, I'm specifically thinking about that one time when we had that group from the university come
Yes.
in.
Yes.
And suddenly we had a lot of hands kind of like tugging at
We
the
had significant
internet.
shifts in practice that morning, a lot of marching around.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I was just kind of thinking about that as like, usually change happens here slowly and we can like adjust to it, but sometimes say pipe bursts in the middle of a zazen, we're going to be acting very differently.
Yeah, so Hoshin can tell you it never fails. Right before Sesshin, something breaks in this building. Right? The pump goes out of the bathroom. We have a leak in the ceiling. So there was a time I had to get all the Sesshin people. We were sitting Sesshin in the common room. Can you imagine? Cheek by jowl in the common room because we had a leak and coming through. Yeah, stuff happens, and then we react. So I think when we say yes, we know how to act. I think we, as practitioners and people who either formally or informally have taken bodhisattva vows, whether or not we're wearing something, the fact that we keep showing up, right, is vow of repentance and vow of repentance and vow of repentance. From that space, we know how to act in a temple because we know what our aspiration is. And if my friend has never been here before, I can't hold up that yardstick. Because why would I, right? So that's not to say that we don't go into somebody else's practice space and they do things differently. We don't necessarily know. Do I bow here? Oh, you don't bow. Oh, what do I wear in this space? Oh, you don't wear robes? Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, we go along with what we're doing, because that's what you do. You don't carry your own stuff into that space and go, I'm only going to do what I do. You fold into the Sangha, and you do what the Sangha does. So yes, there will be times when we don't know what we're doing, and that can be scary, and that can be a real hit to your ego if in your own practice space you are so comfortable that not only do you know what to do, you can tell others what to do, and suddenly you're the beginner. Well, I recommend it. You want to blow to your ego, that'll do it. So, I think we have to be careful how we hold up the yardstick, but for ourselves, simply because of our aspiration, we go into a practice space and we have an opportunity to practice. Now, we can also say there is no space which is not a practice space, because when are we not practicing? But if we're going to go into a formal space, we say, oh, I have an aspiration to practice, so I know what to do in this space. And that might simply be, I know what attitude to take in this space, even if I don't know what to do with my body. Right? I know how to take direction, I know how to look around, especially because of our whole thing about non-reliance, right? I know how to look around, I know how to fold in, I know how to not make disruption. I can I can take an instruction without getting angry. Yeah, so we do know what to do in this space, simply because of Dharma repentance all the time, I would say.
We have a question from Abby, and I think maybe we can leave it after that.
Oh, okay. Abby gets the last word? Okay.
Okay. I just want to say that I have never been able to visit Sanshin and probably never will be able to, but I have experienced something that's really kind of wonderful, which is my space at home and my space with you have gradually become one space. Thank you.
Very good. Very good. Well, the regularity of your connection here has got to help that. I mean, you're here 6 days a week. So by now, if that wormhole isn't there, I don't know why. So your practice makes that possible, so thank you for that. All right, shall we close up for today? All right, let's do our closing chant. Thank you, everybody.